Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we'll do just an abridged roll call to say that all trustees are present, and Trustee Reynolds will be joining us shortly. And welcome to Director Ennis, and who is here from the senior team?
Good evening, and thanks, Vice Chair L. Harrison. We have a number of senior staff here who are supporting reports that are on the Committee of the Whole agenda tonight, and so we welcome them all.
Excellent. Thank you, and welcome, Trustee Reynolds. Nice to see you. Okay, so we do not have a private session tonight that I know of anyway for public meeting. That'll be taking place at this time. So we'll move then to item 1.3, which is acknowledgement of traditional lands, and over to you, Donna.
Thank you. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawaterand, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walk before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you so much. Okay, as we move to approval of the agenda, which is item 1.4, just a reminder that we are in committee tonight, so it is less formal. We don't have to. We can use each other's first names, and we'll be using the raise your hand function, and you can open the queue, which is how I'll be following the order. I guess the nuance there will be if there's somebody who's a second time speaker, I will take the first time speakers in advance. And we'll just also do hands up for voting. So we won't be using any other forms. We'll just all be here together tonight. The only, I guess, external form will be the one for collecting questions from the public. And I'll be checking in to see if we've received any of those under item 4.0 later in the agenda. And for anybody who's watching, you can access that form via the board's homepage. And if you go to the live stream, there's a box there to click and submit a question. Okay, so item 1.4, which is approval of the agenda. I'm not aware of any revisions yet. Would somebody like to move? Thanks a lot, Kelly. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Okay, as circulated, all those, please cast your vote. Okay, looking around the screen, that carries. Trustee Collard? Okay, well, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. So we will move through the agenda as circulated then. The first item is 2.1, the minutes under consent agenda items from our meeting on January 12th, 2022. Would somebody be willing to make a thank you very much there, Andrea? Is there any discussion on those minutes? Okay, seeing none, we will vote. All those in favor of the minutes as circulated? Okay, great. That carries unanimously. Thanks very much. Andrea, I like it's like a 3D hand I'm getting from you. That's good. No question there. Okay, so we'll move then into our presentations, which is really the bulk of our agenda and our opportunity to talk about the wide range of subject matter that's on here tonight. The first few, we're welcoming staff to the meeting. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. So the first one is Rob Etoff, Superintendent Etoff, to talk about History and Heritage Months. And this is just an introduction. And he has a presentation. And Rob, I'm just going to ask, because I'm pretty sure it will be asked, whether this presentation can be shared with trustees. And I will put it into the folder then as well.
Yes, absolutely. I just kind of pulled a couple slides together. It's not a very extensive presentation, but I thought a few visuals might be helpful, and I'll absolutely share them with you for inclusion in the folder. And I know you have a jam-packed agenda this evening, so I promise to be brief, but very much wanted to speak to history and heritage months. And this is a topic that I know firsthand that a number of you have received questions about over the years. I know I've had conversations with you about whether we recognize particular months based on community advocacy and interest that's been expressed to you. And excuse me. We certainly have a long history of acknowledging and celebrating history and heritage months in various ways over the years, including the sharing of public acknowledgement through our various social media platforms and inclusion on our calendars. Excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. But certainly most importantly, what we've provided over the years is various resources and learning opportunities associated with these various different months. We've provided those to help continue conversations in our classrooms through the invitation of special guest speakers, for example, as well as learning opportunities to highlight learning opportunities with our staff to highlight the significance of these particular months. As well as to learn more about specific groups represented within our communities. And I believe the reason why I'm here this evening is to share what we hope to bring forward as a recommendation at an upcoming board meeting, and in terms of official recognition and acknowledgement of history and heritage months. Because despite doing a great deal of work behind the scenes, I think it's clear that our broader communities aren't necessarily always aware of that. So in terms of officially recognizing these months in a formal way through a board motion, as well as certainly broader communications, such as inclusion on our board website, for example, we can ensure that our various different communities are aware that these are important to us, that we recognize them, that we acknowledge them, and that we value them. So I think just to start with, I think it's always really important to connect it back to our core purpose as a board around student achievement and well-being. And of course, something that we monitor regularly is developing an increased sense of belonging. And we know, when you can see on the screen there, that this is affirmed in different ways. It's affirmed through the lived experiences of our students and staff, through the building of critical thinking skills, fostering intercultural understanding, certainly partnering with our various different communities, and amplifying the intersecting identities that exist. And all of that really encompasses a key priority within our board around a culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. And that is the real why behind the impetus and the importance of acknowledging and recognizing these months. So we've been highlighting, as I mentioned, over the years, and really acknowledging, recognizing those months that have been identified provincially as history and/or heritage months. Those are listed on the screen there. It's our intention to continue to highlight these months that are included in this list, Currently, we've been focusing on following the History and Heritage Months and adding resources as part of a multi-phase approach. Um, I think it's important that through this approach, that we recognize that this is a great deal of resources to compile. And so what we did is actually established a writing team this past summer in order to congregate and collate these various different resources that have been developed over time. So we had a group of educators that were part of writing teams that worked and collaborated with our library services staff to identify resources that would serve to amplify identities, especially those that have been traditionally underrepresented in the resources that we currently have in our schools and in our libraries. We've been doing so and really doing audits of our school libraries to identify gaps to help inform not only the development of our resources, the compiling of our resources, but also to help guide purchasing and trying to fill some of those gaps that we know exist. So our human rights and equity team established these writing teams that were focused on collating and curating a range of educator resources to support learning during these months, but certainly beyond these months as well. Educators from a range of divisions and certainly identities help with this work. And throughout the course of the last several months have been part of a process to bring that out more broadly and in terms of consulting with individuals who identify with these particular groups and to help us with our next phase of development. So what you see here on the screen would be an example of shells that we're building that are going to exist within our intranet site, MyHDSB, and would be available to staff. And you can see we've kind of built it into three core sections. One, resources that affirm identity, a section around curriculum connections, and then a broader set of community resources, because we have various different partnerships and relationships with lots of different community organizations who've developed their own resources. And so this is an opportunity for us to really take advantage and leverage those. We've certainly throughout this process have been looking to see what other boards have been doing, like the Simcoe County Board, Peel, TDSB, and have leveraged some of the knowledge that they have put in place over the years, and really modeled our approach after that. So the intention is to build these shells and to continue to add over time. We certainly have quite a range of resources that are currently compiled and ready to put into these shells. But beyond the actual resources for staff, we know a really important element that I don't think has necessarily been there to the extent that we needed it to be there. Is around making our broader communities aware that we do this work, that this work is integral to learning in the classrooms. We know that learning is much more impactful when students can identify and know that they can identify with the resources that are being used in the classrooms, and they see their identities affirmed within those resources in the classroom. So certainly there's a core communications piece. So we'll be working with our communications department in building out a page on the board website that would list these months of significance and certainly combine that with, of course, the ongoing process that we have been utilizing and the strategies that we have been utilizing over the years with respect to acknowledgement via social media and and otherwise. So I think the reason to bring this forward today was to let you know that this is coming forward, and to provide you with an opportunity to maybe ask any preliminary questions, or certainly would appreciate any insight that you may have with respect to what you may have heard from the community over the years that may help guide us in this next stage of formalizing our approach to this work.
Super. Thanks, Robin. We do have some speakers queued up here. We'll go Jean and then Margot.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy. Rob, thanks for this presentation tonight. I just wanted to ask, how are we, or how does the board measure the work being done in our schools? Or let's just even start with the resources in our school libraries that support this valuable direction that our board has taken. For example, do schools get special allowances to make sure that their library resources are really, that they really speak to this range of identities within our board?
Thanks very much for the question, Jean. I can say Jean, right? Doesn't have to be Trustee Gray tonight. Thanks, Jean, for the question. Something that's been really powerful over the last couple of years that I would say wasn't always there in the past was there's been a really close relationship that has been developed between our library services and our equity department. And some of that has certainly come about with respect to the development of our administrative procedure last year, or updating of our administrative procedure around instructional and library resources, and really ensuring that there was a strong emphasis on equity when we are choosing and selecting resources, not only for our libraries, but for our classrooms as well. So we have been working in partnership with them, and they in turn have been working with their staff to conduct equity audits in our libraries to again identify some of those gaps. First of all, identify some resources that need to be removed, that are no longer appropriate in our libraries, and for that matter in our classrooms, and likewise looking for opportunities to see where there might be gaps. And the reason why I shared this particular example of Tamil Heritage Month is we know that that's a gap in a lot of our libraries. And so it isn't so much about additional monies, but it's about ensuring that the existing budgets are used in ways that identify these gaps and look to fill them. And so we have a variety of different resources that have been identified that affirm identity. You can see the one example on the screen here, a book entitled The Boat People by Sharon Bala. And so, looking to see, does that exist in all of our libraries, some of our libraries, and if not, working with staff in order to ensure that there's a strategic purchasing going forward.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Margot, then Tanya, and then we'll see if we can wrap this one.
Yeah, so I just, Rob, I've spoken to you about this before. I just think this is so important. I think it's so great that we're looking at finding that ways to hear those voices from within our community, and recognizing that maybe, as you're saying, so you're looking at these pieces of information that you have as resources, that the students in our schools are reflected in the teaching that our teachers are giving them, which is so important in making things meaningful. I know I've heard from numerous people as to ensuring their voices are heard. So I'm really pleased that we're moving forward with this. And I know that I hope the trustees will look at ways to sort of bolster this piece of information. So I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I'm having some technical difficulties tonight, so I may have missed this. There's a lot of work for you and your team to do. So how do we go about prioritizing which heritage months need the most resources first? are we looking at our student census to dictate that priority, or so I'll look to you for that. And then my second question is, can I assume that once this goes to the board, and I'm happily in support of this, how will we be sharing this information to our students and parents and community members? Will there be a dedicated space on the HDSB website outlining the different heritage months, and perhaps even providing resources with links?
Mhm.
Yeah, so in terms of I guess the second piece first is, yes, we think a critical component that is missing right now is that place where either you as trustees or we as staff can direct families and community members to on our board website to say, you can go here and you can see the provincial heritage history and heritage months, and there would be kind of a drop-down menu for each that would also include a couple of broad community resources there. And then in terms of sorry, just to go back to your first piece, Tanya.
My first piece was about how do we prioritize what work gets done first.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah. The team has identified certainly some starting points. Recognizing that there are a number of heritage months. We've been looking at our student census, but also, as I mentioned, looked at where some of those gaps are. So we've done a fair bit of work in some areas, but again, looking at our population and knowing that there's I'm trying to remember the number now, but whether it's 40 or 50% of our population identify as sick, and so understanding that that's a really critical one to highlight, and also highlight because it's a group that's has, I would say, maybe traditionally been underrepresented in the resources that have been integrated into our classrooms and libraries. So that's how we've gone about that work. There's some others like Italian Heritage Month that I would say there's probably less of a focus on at this particular time, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any focus on. So we're really trying to highlight some of those key ones, and start with those first, and then know that over time we're going to be building up resources in some of these other ones as we move forward.
Leah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this presentation. I'm really happy to see that this work has already begun, and I think that that's a good place to be. We're changing what we have in our libraries. We're making sure that we've got information on our calendars and on our websites. My concern is, I don't know if that's enough. I think we need to be much more vigorous and positive and proactive in our actions. And I say this out of not out of respect. I was really blown away with the directors panel, and I was so impressed with that action. With that, I've had many requests to send it out to people who missed it. It was outstanding. And I do believe that is the first step towards many that we need to do in terms of being very proactive with our community. Because look, if we don't do that, staff or parents or students may not check in on what we have. And I think that's really, really important. I love that we have and promote Black History Month, and it is huge. I can see it very visibly in social media. Kids, it's become a expectation people know what month it is. And, when I was growing up, I think February was considered Heart Month. And that's how I remembered it. But now it's not. For me, it has much more meaning. And so I just wanted to acknowledge what I had seen, and I very much support actions to see what we can do to be more proactive, to change the narrative that people have. And I'm going to tell you, I think we have a very important part to play here. Just watching what I saw in, for example, Ottawa, the hate was outstanding. And I think that we have a very important place to change the narrative. So I am fully behind this, and I'm going to ask for more because I really, really think we need vigorous, proactive action.
Thank you. Sorry, Rob, I cut you off. Did I
No,
cut
I was
you
just
off?
going to say, no, thanks. Thanks for that, Leah.
Awesome. Okay. And Margot, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so no, I just wanted to respond really to Leah in looking even at what we as trustees are doing to support and promote what the school board is doing. And I think it comes down to us each month being able to have that motion coming forward, somewhat similar to what we did with the Human Rights and Equity Week coming every month, and formally recognizing those heritage months that have been recognized by the government within our first board meetings of the month. So I think that's a really important piece. I know Rob and I have talked a little bit about this. I have a letter that I have to return to somebody, but I think, again, as you said, Leah, it's not only about the action, but it's about the promotion of the action to make sure people see what we're doing and see we support that community culture that we have within Halton. So I just wanted to follow up with you.
May I have a follow-up to that, please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So is it our intention then as trustees, should we be making a motion to acknowledge every single one of them, what month it's going to be celebrated, and set the goal for the board as to what the curriculum and the supports can be put towards? Is that what I'm hearing? Because I'm happy to put that forward. I'm happy to support that. I think we need to be very action orientated here, because I think this can change the world.
Point of order, that motion would be coming at the board table, not at committee of the whole.
Yeah.
And I think that Rob is bringing forward a report, and it probably has recommendations attached.
Go ahead, Rob. I was going to ask you to clarify in terms of the motion piece or the action piece, and also just the timing piece.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. Ultimately, we're looking forward to bringing forward a report, possibly to the first board meeting in March, if that works. And a part of that could be a number of motions, and one certainly is, the Halton District School Board, officially recognizing the provincial history and heritage months. And then there could be other motions certainly attached to that. For example, just has been mentioned here, that or it could be woven into the to the primary motion, which would be that, and these will be acknowledged and recognized in the following ways, right? Which could include, as Leah mentioned, acknowledgement at the appropriate months. At those board meetings, right? And we could certainly provide you with the information, snippets, as well as the links to the particular legislation associated with those various different months.
That's super. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so for me, the only outstanding consideration at this time is whether the report will mention what the change mechanism is or the adaptation mechanism. So if another month is recognized, it seems like we we're emulating the provincial recognition. So if another month becomes recognized, it would be through that mechanism that we also bring it on, or whether there are other ways kind of thing to adapt that list. And we don't have to talk about that now. I'm just saying that would be a question that I would ask at the board meeting. Because these things change over time, tend to grow as we recognize broader diversity. So
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. And certainly that is one of the challenges is, groups will, look at the list and see that maybe they are, they're not identified on that list. And I just, as I've said privately to you, Tracy, and the director and others, that can't stop us from moving forward. We need to move forward. And that's why we're starting with those that are officially recognized. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be consideration going forward with adding to that list, but to identify a process in order to do that.
awesome, thank you. And seeing no other questions or comments, sounds like we'll be hearing more and talking more about this in the next month or so. So that's awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, or please feel free to stay, whatever you please. And we'll move on to items under 3.2. Those are the admin procedure updates, and there's 3 of them. So welcome Superintendent Taha to go over those 3. And I just want to remind people that this month they were both linked in the agenda that Gail sent out, and they're in the folder. So whichever way you please, you could access them in multiple ways. Go ahead, sorry.
Good evening, trustees. Thank you, Tracy. So before you are 3 administrative procedures that are due for revisions. I'll speak very briefly to all 3 in terms of what the purpose they serve, and highlight the changes, which I would characterize as minor in nature. The first administrative procedure is the Deferred Leave Plan or Salary Holdback Plan. Essentially, it's a mechanism with which an employee can defer their salary because they plan on taking a leave of absence in a particular year. In a way, this plan allows them to save for that year in which they would be unpaid. So, for instance, you can plan to save your salary over a 4-year period, and in the 5th year you are taking that year off, and over the 4 years you've saved 20% of your salary. That would mitigate the loss of income in that year. So that's what the plan or what the AP speaks to and operationalizes for our employees. It's set out in the Income Tax Act and is governed by a bunch of regulations and rules that we would have to adhere to. The second administrative procedure that's before you is the Substance Use Intervention and Prevention. This is an administrative procedure that really sets out our methods, or the mechanism with which we ensure that the workplace is safe for students and staff in the event that there is impairment in the workplace, and also methods with which we support our employees who may be having difficulties as it relates to different substances. What I would highlight in this AP is that we've moved away from the use of the word abuse. It used to be named substance abuse, and now we've gone to the word of substance use. And also we eliminated any mention or reference to the word addiction. We've substituted it with the word dependence. And really this is part of a review of all of our health and wellness documentation to ensure that the language and the spirit in which it's written is blame-free. So the idea of an addiction versus dependence or abuse versus use, we eliminate the word abuse and use the word use in an effort to eliminate that blame sort of, or the feelings of blame that an AP may elicit. And lastly, the Occupational Health and Safety AP, This is an administrative procedure that really puts in practice what's enshrined in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which is the internal responsibility system. The internal responsibility system is this notion that it's a joint responsibility of the employee and the employer to ensure a healthy and safe workplace. Employees have 3 rights enshrined in legislation: the right to refuse work, the right to participate in decisions that impact the safety and well-being of the workspace and workplace, and also the right to know of hazards and risks in the workplace. And now more than ever, we hear more about hazards and risk in the workplace given the pandemic. So really this AP speaks to how we put all of this in practice, specifically through the site-based joint health and safety committees. Again, the changes that have been brought forward are minor, cosmetic, some housekeeping stuff, but with respect to the substance use intervention prevention, highlight the change of phraseology or language that we've adopted. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Hello. So we do have a couple of 3 people in the queue now, and I'm wondering if we want to take questions related to, are there any on the deferred leave plan with salary holdback? Can we go in order that way? Is everybody okay if we do that, Jean? It looks like you're the only, okay, awesome. So we'll go Andrea, then Tanya, and we'll kind of go 1, 2, 3, step through them.
Okay, my question is just how many employees are really taking us up on this? And I'm just asking this because I know someone who did take a year off, who was an employee of the board, really found it incredible and refreshing for her to come back to the job. But I'm wondering how many people actually do take it. I know there's a limit. Have we ever bumped up against that limit?
No, yeah, the limit I believe is 2% of the leave within that bargaining unit, just to ensure that we're not running into staff shortages. Not exceed 2% of the membership of who are on leave. To be honest with you, single digits. I would say the uptick with respect to this kind of leave in any particular year is less than 10 across our district. So it's not very popular, however useful and helpful it can be. But yeah, the uptick is not such that limit prevents us from approving leave of absence.
Okay, and just as a sort of a follow-up, so I don't go back on the list, I just want to say thank you for the changes for the language about around abuse and such. I think that those are very important changes to make.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Tanya, your question's also on this one.
Mine is both tied to this one and the third one. It's more of a housekeeping issue. And that is, what policies do these APs tie back to?
So I don't believe any of these APs cross-reference a particular policy. Let me just double check. They mostly cross-reference legislation and or other administrative procedures. But I can certainly see a variety of policies that would engage these administrative procedures, be it employee health and wellness. Actually, we don't have a policy called employee health and wellness. I would have to go to our board website to sort of cross-reference policies that engage these. For instance, our human rights policies and action plans absolutely engage our substance use prevention intervention. Our occupational health and safety also would engage the human rights code and human rights policies and safe schools. Deferred leave plans, I would, again, it's more of an administrative procedure or one instrument or intervention that allows employees to perhaps invest in professional development or take a year off to, as the AP would say, to rejuvenate. But that's something that we can certainly go back and look at to make sure that we cross-reference policies that we believe engage those APs. So thank you for raising that, Tanya.
Thank you.
So can I just clarify there, Tanya? Would you say that all of these APs require to be tied to a board policy, just so it's clear what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying, only because that's what we have stated in our policy and procedure framework, that every policy has a companion procedure and every procedure has a companion. Not on a one-to-one ratio, but everything needs to tie back to a policy.
Okay, just wanted to be clear on that one. Thank you. And Trustee Jean, you're up.
Thank you. Sorry, this is just a quick question. I couldn't help but notice that the review dates stated for each of these three admin procedures, they have different review dates. One is a year from now, one is 3 years from now, and one is 5 years from now. And I was just wanting to get some clarity as to how it is that we pick the review date. Maybe you could just help us understand that.
Certainly. So the Occupational Health and Safety AP, the review date is enshrined in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You have to review it annually. So you'll see that reflected in the review dates. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what the criteria is or the formula is for review dates, be it 3 or 5. I would have to circle back with perhaps General Manager Gail Gortmaker or other some of my colleagues just to nail down the criteria. But the AP for Occupational Health and Safety is enshrined in legislation. I see Gail's hands up.
Go ahead.
I wasn't sure if that was, his complete answer, but yes, they vary depending on legislation, depending on tying it with the policy review in some cases, and just depending on the education minister and the climate in Ontario education that may dictate a review at any given time.
Thank you.
That was a much more eloquent answer.
They worked together. Together they presented the package. Excellent. Okay, so these will be coming forward to the board under the consent agenda. And having them here gives us an opportunity to have a more full and complete conversation. And it sounds like there are just a couple things that trustees are hoping can be given some consideration before or when they come to the board. And that'll be great. Okay. So seeing no other comments or questions at this time, thanks very much for, again, indulging this procedure and having the discussion here. It is appreciated. And it kind of morphs into the next conversation around a new procedure and a revised policy that it ties back into. And those are related to PPM 166, the subject which is anti-sex trafficking. So welcome to Scott and Brent, and I will turn it over to you with the request that if you too have a presentation, if you could flip it over. And I have put Rob's in the folders already, and I'll send that to trustees. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees. Brent and I are happy to share this new. It's a first-time administrative procedure resulting from PPM 166, which is a new PPM on anti-sex trafficking. Brent has led this work at a regional level and at our board level. So I'm going to have him take you through. I think trustees will be interested in some of the background and how this was developed. And you'll see accompanying is the Safe and Accepting Schools policy, which we're putting this admin procedure within the broader Safe and Accepting Schools policy, where most of our safe schools policies lie, and we felt it was a good fit there. So I'll turn it over to Brent, and we're happy to answer any questions after the quick presentation.
Thanks. I have just a few slides to help ground this. There's a lot of new documents that have been shared with this new PPM 166 that was released last summer that directed boards to develop a policy framework for anti-sex trafficking and how to move that forward. What we've learned through this is that safe schools, both physically and psychologically, are critical to element of success for nurturing students' experiences in our schools. And human trafficking is one of the fastest growing and most lucrative crimes worldwide. It's predatory, it's devastating and damaging to victims, survivors, and their families and communities. We've also learned that Ontario has had the most police reported incidents of human trafficking in the country occurring within this province since 2019. And we know Halton is not immune to these incidents and have been working with community supports. The Halton region approach around this developing of this this admin procedure and the protocol was boards were given the option to develop it independently or as a grouping. And so we took a regional approach, as many of our regional approaches for VITRA, as well as our police protocol, has the four terminus boards using common language and definitions, engaging with multi-sector community organizations, and a coordinated regional response procedure for these. Because we do know the families cross districts, they cross within the community and within the community agencies that are supporting them, and to ensure we're coordinating our approach to support students and families. Throughout this administrative procedure and the broader anti-sex trafficking multi-board protocol, so we started with the regional approach and then developed our board administrative procedure afterwards to align with it. We engaged community consultations throughout November and January, where a variety of stakeholder groups, parents, staff, and students from across the region were engaged. We provided an info session from one of our strong community partners in this area, Savis and Halton Regional Police, to give background on the information and provide context of what the Halton experience is in this area, and that we are a corridor for much of this happening within the province. The HDSB administrative procedure, we worked through consulting with key departments for development. We use the provincial framework and template that boards have been directed to ensure they are following the instructions in the PPM and the guidance, and we ensured that there was consistency within the region for families. So there's very similar language between the two documents to ensure that we are in compliance with that. We are now at the point where we are creating staff training and a module for all staff to roll out for the startup of the 22-23 school year. This has been, we've been able to engage a former superintendent to support us in developing of this within our board. Julie Hunt-Gibbons will be working with us to develop this with our departments as well as with our curriculum to ensure that we have clear ties and it's connected to current age-appropriate curriculum, which is mentioned in the PPM as well as noted in the K-8 curriculum at age-appropriate steps and benchmarks for each grade, as well as secondary curriculum. We do know that this does intersect with students at a very young age. It's quite chilling when we hear when the recruitment is happening. It's happening in the 13 and 14-year age group, and there is a considerable concern around that. I wanted to make sure parents, students, and the community have the resources. I'll stop sharing at that point. I can answer any questions from the AP. I know you do have that, as well as the protocol for the multiple boards in front of you as well. Scott, have I missed anything as well?
No, I think the value is just hearing any questions that trustees may have.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Did you want to take AP questions first or policy, or can I ask a policy question?
I'm fine with either, Tanya.
Okay, so I really appreciate this coming to us only because I know how prevalent sex trafficking is in Halton. And this is something that I'm very keen on us having a policy and procedure on. The question I have pertains to the policy itself. It talks about safe and accepting schools. And when I think of safe and accepting schools and the way the information is presented, it's very heavy on reducing inappropriate behavior and what are the disciplinary actions for that behavior. Whereas sex trafficking is not an inappropriate behavior for our students, it's a crime. And it's something that needs to be identified and recognized to get those children out of it. So I had a really hard time inserting the sex trafficking into the policy. Is there any way we can have a separate paragraph that deals with trafficking? Only because I just wasn't comfortable the way everything was meshed in. To me, it didn't flow. I feel that it's two different topics. One is about, hey, you're being bullied, let's deal with it, and here's the disciplinary action, versus sex trafficking is, oh my goodness, I think one of my students is being trafficked. What are the signs to recognize it? What can I do to help them out of it? So all the language between the different topics, it was just very unclear to me. Is there anything that perhaps we can do to delineate between unwanted behaviors at school versus criminal behaviors in the public?
We could flesh this out further in the policy. I think the preamble very much captures this about. It is about a student safety piece. It's an educative piece. It's an awareness piece for all the members of the community about making good choices in terms of that nature. So I think the preamble certainly captures it. Most of our policies for safe and accepting schools are within here. We didn't want to start. In some cases, it can just become a bit of a rewrite of the AP. This is largely rostered here because we don't see it sitting anywhere else. There are links in the policy to certainly the duty to report for teachers, and that's a strong piece you'll notice in there, but it isn't just about that. So I did wrestle with that when we were looking at the policy, because most of this is about that. There are some other exceptions around safety. For example, the exclusion policy isn't directly mentioned in here, but it is about safety of students as well. That one's another minor exception where it is mentioned here as well. We could put something broader and add another paragraph to this around flushing out aspects of safety, because that would bring, it can certainly do that. This policy update would require approval of trustees, so we can make that addition. No problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Thanks. In support of what Scott has mentioned, but I also wanted to sort of broaden the scope of the policy to Tanya's point, because it also references, the policy also references sexual assault and violence. I mean, so it's not just about bullying. So I just wanted to put that context as well, but in support of what Scott has said as well.
Awesome. Go ahead, Tanya.
So question to Scott. In the policy, I'm looking for clarification. The second paragraph in section 2 policy, it talks about, after all those numbers that are listed, it talks about together create expectations for behavior which apply to students, whether on school property, on buses, at school-related events or activities, or in other circumstances that could have an impact on school climate. Can you define or elaborate what are in other circumstances? And is that relating to social media? I was unclear, and I'm just looking for clarification. Scott, you're muted.
That was incredibly insightful what I just said, and you missed it. But here we go. There's a concept of nexus to the school is what that's referring to, without getting too technical. And many times administrators, all sorts of incidents that can happen off property, on weekends, certainly social media, where it isn't typically on property, on buses, or in events. But it could be, for example, off-site at a plaza where there's an arranged fight. It's detrimental to the school climate. It certainly involves two students. It's damaged or injured one of the students. So it's really referring to that in a more global sense. There's lots of context where school discipline is applied outside of the formal school realm, so to speak. And that's increasing, actually, to be quite candid about it. It is, and students are learning that they are responsible for what they say, do, and text to other students of the school more and more frequently. It's one of the things we have to frequently explain is that this concept of nexus to kids, to parents, because it's a kind of a legal concept, we try to put in more plain language. That's what it's referring to.
Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no other hands up at this point in time, I have a couple of comments / questions on the administrative procedure. And again, I recognize the APs are in staff purview, so these are, I guess, comments for consideration and or questions. The first one is with respect to the statement of principles. The first one is A, to foster student voices, and it says students are at the center of this work and should be involved in efforts to develop actions against sex trafficking. And I just wondered whether there has been any consultation with students to develop this AP, and if not, whether that would be, just given this first principle, something that you would be willing to do before it comes forward or before it's implemented.
Yeah, I'll let Brent explain how students were included in the development.
So we reached out through our 2 student trustees, and I met with Student Senate and visited Student Senate, and we asked for representation through our Student Senate to our focus groups. And we also committed to bring back to the group once we gotten further in development phase the work that we've been working on. And we had students attend at that level. And I know the other boards we worked with on the regional approach for the consultations had students as well from the region. So it wasn't just students, we had students from our board as well as students from across the region involved in the consultation.
I'll just add to that as well. There'll be a second layer when the professional development is put together, and Brent mentioned Julie Hunt-Gibbons is leading this. We have some funding for the ministry to help with the development and rollout of this PPM and the subsequent training. Julie will also be developing that and including students at that PD level as well. So it'll come in once in the development stage and also in kind of the more practical, what does this look like for staff and kids, the phase as well.
Great, thank you.
We do expect to wrap a bow on all of this by May 1st. So if trustees are interested, we can let you know what, give you a better sense of what the professional development will look like, that all staff will be doing early in September.
And that would be great. And the other thing, it's really fantastic to consult with Student Senate. I wonder whether there are other lived experiences in our entire student population that would also be critical to somehow sensitively find and bring those voices into it as well. That's just a comment. And then my second question is the AP. It talks about the reporting process and the contacting of who and when and so on. But I wonder about kind of those longer term pieces after that reporting has been done, and like what does the follow up with the involved persons look like? Because I think it might not be like a one and done kind of thing.
I can respond to that. And I know through our state schools social work team, part of our context in the Halton response will be ongoing follow-up and coordination to ensure support at the school level, and also ensuring a connection to the appropriate community resources for ongoing follow-up. So that is part of our role with this, and why we're one of the reporting steps, but that'll also allow for follow-up at the school and with regional supports.
Great. I don't know if that part is reflected in the AP, but it might be valuable for people to kind of know and understand that longer investment in the process.
Okay, fair. Thank you. I'll take that.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions in. Oh, yes, I do. Go ahead, Joanna. Hello, Joanna. Still can't hear you though. No.
She said it's okay.
Yeah. Do you want to type it or try your phone or something? Just give her a second here. We're doing medium on time.
I think so I was saying brilliant work, Scott and Brent.
I'm hearing that PD will start in September. Yes, she said that. And then she said, is PD starting in September? Is that what you said?
Yes. We're waiting. So there's a ministry expectation that there'll be part of our PD days are devoted to the anti-sex trafficking training. So we haven't scheduled which date, but just in talking with Associate Director Bo, we are thinking early in September to have this completed.
However, this is quoting Joanna here. Time is of the essence. Will anything be offered or available sooner?
We did a very short version this fall. It certainly wasn't as comprehensive as it will be. So something was done with all staff this past September. So in that sense, just foundational work has been done with staff. This will be much deeper and richer. We spent about an hour this past September for all staff, so it's not totally unknown concept. Our modules won't even be developed until May 1st, so it's unlikely anything will occur from May to June. It's just such a busy time of year, and our professional development days are already allocated for other pieces of importance as well. So I agree it is important work, but we are aiming for September.
Thank you. And that's not to say that any issues that arise would be unsupported, you would be kind of full on to those. But the training will just be coming later. Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you very much. I don't see any other people with their hand up at this point in time. And this will be, when will this be coming to the board? The revised policy and the AP under consent agenda. Is it soon?
We can bring it for the next meeting. I can make a small amendment to the policy and we can have it up for the next meeting if that's possible.
Okay, so that will be coming in imminently then.
Yes, imminently.
Thank you. That word. Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot for bringing this information and the opportunity to ask questions. We will move on then to item 3.4, which is the budget workshop. And I see we have a few of the wonderful staff here from the budgeting group. Welcome to Jackie and Jay and Roxana. Over to you.
Well, good evening to all of you. Thank you for having us today. I'm just going to try to share my screen. See if we can put this up and also see you at the same time. Okay, how is that?
It's good.
All good. Okay. If I try to present it as a slideshow, I can't see anything anymore. So if you can see this, okay, we'll go with this. And then you let me know if it's too small. So thank you for having us today. We are formally kicking off the budget development for 2022-2023. And similar with the prior year presentations, we wanted to discuss with you early on in the planning stage about just setting the stage for next year. What do we know to date? What is our process and timeline and key dates, as well as provincially, what are some of the key things that we need to consider? Board perspective, what are we looking at or expecting as of right now? And then planning for next year, what are some of the priorities, including some of the key points about gathering some input into our budget process. So from a perspective of the budget objectives, as trustees are well aware, the budget is supporting the multi-year plan priorities and commitments. It aligns with the operational plans, both in terms of the annual operating plan as well as a special education plan, which are typically approved in June around the same time with the budget. It also considers the corporate risk profile, those high risk areas that we identify in private session in terms of what may impact our ability to meet the strategic objectives that we have for the board. And as we're looking at aligning resources, as we're looking at additional funding or use of reserves, how are those items and initiatives supporting, mitigating some of those risks on the corporate risk profile? Accountability over financial resources is also top of mind. Our board has been financially diligent over years, and as you know, we do have quite healthy surplus, and we are in a fortunate position to be able to dip into that surplus year after year to some extent to complement the resources that are available to our system. Our budget and our funding, I should say, is also heavily mandated. So regulatory compliance is also key and top of mind as we go through the budget planning process. And in terms of timelines, during November and December last year, we've already started the budget planning by looking at the Ministry of Funding consultations. There were various sessions and discussions with the ministry, whether they were around the superintendents of business or the directors of education or the trustee association tables, and feedback was provided back from those organizations to the ministry. We also had started discussions in terms of senior staff priorities, planning, staffing, models of learning, etc. So preliminary discussions already took place. Through January and February, so during the current months, we are engaging in additional discussions with our departments in order to determine what the operating base budget would be. We are starting with the stakeholder consultation. We're kicking off the budget survey on February 18th. And also we're using this opportunity and from now and over the next few weeks to discuss with trustees some of the areas of challenges and as well as areas of priorities and get your feedback into the budget process. Through March and April, we are looking forward to receiving the release of the grants for student needs, having additional budget sessions and working on our staffing projections, as well as finalizing our operating budget and capital budgets. And finally, May and June, we have the draft budget presented to the board, to SEAC, that's the Special Education Advisory Committee, and then the final budget comes for approval to the board mid-June. We do have, as per regulation, until the end of June to pass a compliant budget for the year. So a couple of the key dates to keep in mind, and our website has also been updated with these dates. As we move through these milestones, we will add the reports and presentations to the website. So between now and April 6th, we are going to have the survey. It will close on March the 7th, and we will gather the input and present it to the board on April 6th. We'll have a further presentation on April 13th, when we hope to provide you more information as a result of the release of the grants, and we'll know a lot more in terms of the direction, the modes of learning, if we have additional timed investments by that time. Between then and May, we are looking at additional updates and presentations as soon as we are able to finalize the draft budget. And the two key dates when we present the draft budget at the board table are June 1st and then the final on June 15th. So I've already covered this in terms of the key dates with the survey, the budget survey, and the feedback being presented back to the Board of Trustees. In that feedback, I would like to also include a section in terms of the feedback that I received from you, from the board. The Special Education Advisory Committee meeting might be in May or June, so it's tentative at this point, and it's based on the release of the grants for student needs, as well as the ability to have a draft budget, so we can have that meaningful discussion and input from this committee into the budget, based budget. So looking at a provincial perspective, education remains a key part of the provincial budget. It's the second largest component, and for the current year, the budget was 25.6 billion provincially. In addition to that, 1.6 billion were provided as timed investments in the form of priorities and partnership funds and COVID supports. The funding for education funding for next year focused on mental health supports and challenges, gathering some challenges for the boards and how the additional funding that was timed investment was used. looking at the Learning Opportunities Grant and the needs where that is being applied, potentially looking at more enveloping, which will restrict further the grant and provide less flexibility to school boards, further reducing administrative burden and red tape. So those are the main areas of the focus for the grants for student needs, which tell me that we are looking for a regular grants for student needs without significant changes, potentially some more investment in mental health, some enveloping opportunities, perhaps around learning opportunities. And what I don't see there mentioned, but it was mentioned the prior year's guidance was COVID supports and challenges, and that was not in the current guide. As we are looking in terms of this current year, what the focus for those additional supports have been additional investments for classroom resources, teachers, and support staff. Focusing on learning recovery or learning renewal, as we are looking at now, mental health supports, special education supports, a big focus on ventilation, cleaning, custodial, and technology, as well as the personal and protective equipment being provided by the province to all school boards. Provincially, enrollment trends have been a little funny in the last year and a half, or that we've been following where the growth is going. So from a provincial lens, what we have seen is that many families with school-aged children seem to have moved outside of the urban areas, outside of the GTA, into potentially more affordable communities and more rural school boards that have in the past seen a decline in enrollment are now seeing an increase in enrollment, and a region like ours that has seen increase in enrollment is now has seen a drop, as well as more of a flattening trend in terms of growth. So we are not sure when and if we are going to recover some of those students. The ministry has made a commitment to try to release both the provincial budget as well as the grants for student needs as early as possible. And they are looking at the end of March and beginning of April, and hoping to provide us with additional planning information and additional timed investments at the same time, so we can make the decisions as early in the process as possible. So looking at next year, we are still unsure until the grants for student needs are released in terms of the approach. Staffing does happen a lot sooner than the end of March or beginning of April. So we are currently unsure whether or not we're going to be looking at an all in-person learning model, or looking again having to run two models of learning, including virtual schools. The labor agreements are set to expire, so central negotiations are going to be ongoing throughout at least part of next year. With that, we are losing significant funds that were attached to the collective agreement, so the student support funds and the education worker protection funds for a board like ours, and we do have some additional details. That was approximately 6.9 million a year, and those for next year are expiring. And while there's negotiations, we don't know what the result will be and whether or not they will come back in to a certain degree, and when they may be available. In addition to that, there were significant timed investments that were made through the year, released in different phases. Another 13.4 or so million for our board that are not yet contemplated or announced. So we do have to wait until the grants are released to get more information. In addition to that, early June, there is a provincial election. So that also will provide some unknowns from a perspective of who will win the election, what will be the mandate for the next year, and the focus and priority for the education sector. So if we look at the board perspective, as I mentioned, we would expect to start with grants for student needs that is similar to this year, so no major changes other than the impact of enrollment. With regards to enrollment, we're looking at a decline in the elementary panel and a modest increase in the secondary panel. With the international students, we are probably going to be around the break-even point, but we're not going to see the growth that we have been accustomed to prior to the pandemic. The decline in enrollment at the elementary level is as a result of lower entry-level grades, additional or increase in homeschooling, but also larger grades moving to high school, and they're being replaced by the lower grades. In addition to what I had mentioned, the migration that we've seen in the province, where some of those school-age children are being enrolled in more rural boards. We do continue to be conservative when we are looking at the international students' numbers and revenues. The ability to rent our facilities and generate rental income. Interest revenue remains very low compared to other years, and school-generated funds, which have also been significantly impacted by all the restrictions, are also expected to remain quite low. There's a lot going on the front of opening new schools, planning and starting building new schools in South Milton and Northeast Oakville. The pupil accommodation challenges do remain, where we are uncertain how many additional portables we may need, considering the changes in trends for growth that we are seeing. As with the last year, we are looking to support some of our priorities by using some of the board reserves and being able to make use of additional funds in addition to the grants to either make up for some of the lost time investment or have the ability to focus on new initiatives. So what are we looking at in terms of these timed investments that I've mentioned, which is one of the concerns going into the next year? When we look at those tied to collective agreements, we are at around 6.9 million for our board and 13.4 million in COVID timed investments. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would expect that timed investments to support the COVID challenges will continue to some extent and will be announced. I would hope so. The support for student funds, however, is one where we will at the minimum have a partial year or a full year lag. That funding is expiring and it will not be captured in the grants for student needs or timed investments until such time that the central bargaining is complete and they agree on some of those terms. And I'm not sure what those terms may be. I would hope to some extent, if not the full extent, might still be something on the table and something that's going to be negotiated. However, we don't know at this point. So in addition to these amounts, the Board of Trustees also approved a revised budget of 11 million deficit, which means 11 million in surplus in addition to this money to provide even further support, casual temporary staff mainly, to support the system throughout the pandemic. So looking at some of the unfunded positions for next year, we've updated them here by various employee groups. And we are looking at, in particular, the ones under the support for student funds column to be able to accommodate, to the extent possible, some of those positions that our system has grown accustomed to over the last about 2.5 years. They weren't quite a full 3 years in effect, but about 2.5 years, which means that 6.9 million that I mentioned, which is most of our compliance room in the surplus, might be dedicated to maintain the level of service that we have with these employees in these employee groups. A quick overview of the enrollment. As I've mentioned, you'll see quite a bit of a decrease in the elementary panel, and followed by a bit of an increase at the secondary panel. So these are the actual results up to the prior year. The current year budget and revised budget, just for comparison. And when we're looking at the projections for next year, we're still going to review those projections and update them in the budget as we have more information, especially around the March 31st count date. We are looking at a very slight increase over revised when we take into account international students. So if we look at budget to budget, which is what we compare when we finalize the budget book, in terms of our revenue, we receive most of the revenue from the province, so 90% in the form of grant for student needs, plus an additional 1% in some of the timed investments. And then additional grants are with regards to school generated funds, investment income, education development charges, and amortization of deferred capital contributions. So slide 14 just provides budget to budget review for the last 2 years and by a revenue source. And the expense categories, we spent most of our budget around the instruction costs. So instruction is the direct student-facing cost. In addition, indirect costs for the students include pupil accommodation, which is the maintenance and upkeep of our schools and cleaning and groundkeeping, transportation of students, and in the other, it refers to the SGF related items mostly. And so in terms of administration, we're looking at 2.1% of our total budget that is not necessarily directly or indirectly supporting students. And slide 16 is just giving you that comparison in terms of dollar values in those categories of expenses. So when we look at the budget priorities, and this is sort of where I wanted to pause as we get to the end of our presentation, because this is something that we're currently going to be working on. The budget surveys looking around the same type of priorities. We are losing a lot of funding. So we, at this point, are looking to see what we can dedicate in terms of surplus to offset some of those funding reductions to further support student learning and learning renewal, mental health and well-being, special education, and looking at outdoor education as well. And we do have, as I mentioned, some challenges ahead, given the time investments that are expiring and the unknowns as to whether or not and to what extent some of them may be provided to the board next year. And with that, we just wanted to open it up for questions, open it up for feedback. I'm sure the trustees have a lot of thoughts going through your mind, and things that we don't get to today. I would invite you to send additional feedback to me by email, or we can schedule a call and have some discussions throughout the next couple of weeks as well.
Okay, thank you. So Jean, why don't you go ahead?
Right, thank you very much. I wonder if we could back up the slides to slide 10, please.
Mhm.
So slide 10 at the very bottom shows a provincial funding deductions of 20 million. And then the very next slide, it's referred to in the arrow, the second arrow to the right. It says we will allocate a portion of our surplus to address these areas of gaps, but there's no way that we can afford to absorb $20.3 million lost investment. When do the conversations take place, and who's involved in the conversations that will decide which of those, and as you can see, that it's all about support staff and admin staff and what have you. When and how do the discussions take place as to which of those lines we're going to continue to support and which lines will not be able to be supported?
I think that sums up our challenge. So, we're looking at 20.3 million in funding reductions, and we've also allocated 11 million in addition to that from surplus this year, because we were allowed to go to 2% of our provincial allocation. So in terms of what we're going to be able to maintain, if I go to this slide, we are looking, and I'm not sure if you see, yeah, I think you do. So this supports for student fund column, we are looking through this column as being the full-time staff that we've added for the last 2 to 3 years as a result of those labor negotiation agreement additional funding. And as a priority, those positions would be first. The ones that were funded through surplus and the COVID PPF timed investments were more casual, temporary, LTO type of staff. And I do hope, it is my hope, and I don't have additional information, but I would assume there will be some form of additional supports next year based on public health direction, just as it was this year. So I would expect that the PPE will continue to be provided provincially in kind to boards, just like this year, as well as some additional positions to be funded. So I am hoping, we are hoping, as a board, as a senior staff, that those additional PPF positions will have a source of funding. They may be different focused, in terms of what it was this year, but I would expect some of that relief to come our way. What we know for sure, that at least part of the year, this SSF column will not have a funding source, because that expires, then the negotiations have to take place, and we hope in part, or maybe in full, or maybe in more, it will come back and part of the negotiations, but we have no way of knowing. So that portion is what concerns us most. And then we are hopeful to be able to do some of the other positions through timed investments that will be announced.
Thank you very much. If I could have just a second question on slide 16. Yeah. Yes, thank you. We look at transportation on that line, and despite the fact that we had a 2.4% increase in the last year, we still floated, according to slide 10, $1.1 million extra into transportation. We floated more money, I think, because we needed to, possibly because of COVID, I'm not sure. But I think it was referred to earlier this year that there is currently a transportation study underway. And I think, Roxana, you're on the board or the committee that's looking at that. And there was even a thought at some point that the results of that transportation study may have resulted in an increase in the number of kilometers one might qualify to have transportation provided. Just wondered if you could give us an update, because despite the fact of a 2.4% increase, we're still not paying all the bills, and we're having to float money there. Just wondered if you could comment on that.
Yes, thank you for that. The transportation grant increase is not sufficient to cover all of our costs. 1.1 million was in relation to bus cleaning, sanitation, and paying that additional time to our operators to perform those duties. So it wasn't towards more transportation or additional bus drivers. It was as a result of measures in place to keep the buses clean, sanitized, and safe for our students. And we did have quite a challenge when we had to have mid-year runs. Those were additional 2.5 million, for example. So things that were not funded in the past as well. In terms of the working group on the transportation funding, they are still working on their analysis. Initially, they thought this will be completed by now and potentially have the results be included in the grants for student needs next year, which would have meant not additional funding for transportation provincially, but a reallocation of funding. So we wouldn't know if we were on the losing side or on the side of getting more transportation. So that would have been, that is an unknown. So it could still happen. However, they're still working on those analysis. There's a consultant that was hired to look at additional data. So it will take a bit more time, and I'm not sure whether or not they'll have the time to wrap it up with due notice to include those in the following year's formula. So it might be included, but at this point, it might also be delayed for a following year. If it is included, it will be a reallocation of funds, because they are looking at basing the transportation funding formula on certain parameters. Eligibility kilometers is one of them for sure. And I don't know what they would end up with. So for example, if our board uses 1.6 kilometers for elementary students and the formula says 1.8, that means we get less funding, but because we transfer more students, with a lower eligibility criteria. So boards will have to then make a decision on trying to be more efficient, increase their eligibility criteria in some instances. So we don't know where that has landed. It's still something that the committee is working on. And data simulation was provided to the ministry from across the province, the consortia in a few weeks ago, mid to end of January, I would say. So they're still compiling the data. They're reaching out to all the transportation managers from the consortia, and I thought about a third of the bus operators to gather more information at this point.
Thank you. And Amy, you're up.
Thank you, Roxana. So this is a really, really cool presentation. I have to say, I like the way that you put together the provincial perspective. It was very helpful. And as we all know, there's going to be an election in June of this year. And I'm wondering, is there a possibility that the budget could be thrown out if a different party was elected and a new budget put together, that we might have to scramble at the end of June in order to be compliant with whatever a different government might put together? And how does that impact us? I would imagine not in a good way.
Thank you for that question. And I cannot take any responsibility or accountability over how the slides look. They had a makeover from one of our financial analysts who is pretty brilliant and creative, unlike my accountant's mind, which isn't, it's not very pictorial, let's say. But thank you for that. I will pass that along. And she is very excited to tackle some of our other slides as we're moving on with this process. So yes, the slides have been invigorated a little bit. With regards to your question, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. So I would assume right now, with the current government having a majority, the plan would be to approve a provincial budget, which would include releasing our grants for student needs before the writ drops and before the election. The answer to, could another government change? Yes, they could. They could amend things in a year. It would have, unless it's more money, it would have devastating impact. A lot of our funding is mandated. So I would hope that a new government coming in would have some consultations with the various sectors before implementing something major. A lot of those things we would not be able to reduce without notice. And we're looking at class sizes and that are tied to collective agreements, for example. So a lot of our expenses are already committed. And if something drastic was to happen, we would have to cover them for the year. We would not be able to just implement drastic measures. So I would hope that's not going to be the intent of any government coming in power to make that drastic changes. We may see changes to timed investments, I would assume more, and also get a feeling of what to expect after next year. Austerity measures may come, I would expect, after this pandemic because of the additional funding, the additional spending of the province, regardless who will win. I would expect there will be a few years of austerity measures. So something to be prepared for sure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you. I'd echo Amy's comments. I loved the pictures and it was really great to follow. So kudos to your staff. Prior to the pandemic, international students were a valuable funding source. Can you remind us what, in the last few years, what new provincial, I would say, parameters have been imposed upon school boards for international students? I have this feeling, and I can't remember if there was any, if we were after the pandemic, would we be, able to recruit and raise the funds that we had done not so long ago?
Yes, thank you for that question. You recall correctly, I think it's about 2 years now that we've had some measures in the grants for student needs. There is reduction in funding. And if I recall correctly, it's around 650 to 700 per international student. And I know I have my staff on who might be able to let us know the impact on an annual basis, for example, for this year, in terms of what that may mean. But it is a reduction to the grant as a result of having international students. So it's an amount per international student, and that is already has been in for 2 years. The other impact is reduction in the number of international students as a result of the pandemic. So there's two challenges here. One is through the grants, and one is as a result of the pandemic, where we've lost upwards of 200 international students. And I see Jay has his hand up with a number.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I just want to confirm the number. It's 1,300 per international student that's withheld from our grants, or reduced off of our grants.
Thank you for that. So a significant amount. Were we able, I think the other part of the question was, were we able to increase the fees? We were. We did phase them in over 2 years to make up for this increase in reduction in funding. However, as a result of the pandemic and losing over 200 international students, we have lost quite a significant revenue source that was assisting with other areas of the unfunded areas within the grants.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no other people with their hand up right now. May I just ask, on slide 14, is the 13 million, does that represent our overall surplus position at this time?
On slide 13, that is just simply looking at the difference between the 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
That is the transfer to or from accumulated surplus. So in this case, it would have been an increase to accumulated surplus of 13 million. Just keep in mind it's budget to budget, so it's preliminary numbers. Our revised budget has a different picture. We are looking at 11,000 coming out of surplus in order to assist the system. So we actually have a deficit budget.
You mean 11 million, I bet.
Sorry, 11 million.
11,000 would be great. So then
Yes.
where does that leave us in terms of our overall accumulated surplus amount?
I believe I'm still presenting. I'm not sure. I'm just quickly going to pop this on. I'm not sure if I'm doing a window or you can see my screen. No, you cannot see my screen. Okay.
We see the revenue page right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I am only presenting okay. So I'm looking at our revised budget, and we currently have we expect at the end of the year, after we use the 11 million towards assisting the system this year, to be at around 72.9 million in accumulated surplus that's available for compliance, of which we have 18.8 million. Let me see if I can stop presenting this and share another screen. So I'm just going to make this a little bigger. So these are, oops, whoop, where did it go? I went way too far.
It's up there more.
Okay. So these are our ministry forms. not quite as fun as some of the slides that we've presented tonight. So if we're looking here with the first column being the beginning of the year at September, the last column is our ending position, and down here at the bottom, I'm just trying to see what you have. Yeah, so you see the 72 million is our ending balance. So this is what we have within compliance. We do expect to have about 18.8 million that is unallocated, which we have designated for emergency. So it hasn't been assigned to anything in particular. So at the end of the year, we expect to be at around 18.8 million there. We do have the multi-year plan supports designated about 16.7 million at the end of the year. The administrative capital that we have set aside, 30.9, and then some committed projects. These we cannot reassign. These are past capital costs that we've already incurred, and we have to assign them here so that we can bring into revenue a portion of this to cover the amortization over the life of that asset. So this is our available for compliance surplus position.
Thank you. It's great that through fiscal prudence in years gone by, this is there. I feel like this particular budget cycle is going to be certainly the most challenging of my time in this role. The things that have been generously bought through funding related to COVID are somehow going to need to be serviced as we move on. All of the new air filtration, losing funding for 155 staff who I believe will likely be very important. I think one of the questions you asked us, Roxana, is trustee priorities. And for me, well-being, I think, is critical. We've heard about parallel mental health pandemics, and that's something that is going to manifest as we hopefully move out of this darn thing. For both staff and students, and I think will require some additional resources moving forward. So for me, that's a priority. I always support a multi-year plan, pillars, and all that they represent, and the thousands of people that gave us feedback pre-pandemic on those, but we can't also lose sight of moving those forward. So there are no other hands up, but I would just, go ahead, Jean.
I just wanted to make one comment. And earlier we heard Roxana refer to her crystal ball. And there's just no question, just to piggyback your comments, Tracy, this is going to be an extraordinarily difficult year to nail down this budget. And I just want to offer compliments to Roxana and her staff who work so tirelessly to it's like trying to land a 747 in a fog shrouded runway. I've used that analogy before, but there's just so many unknowns, so many moving parts, a government that may not even be there as the 1st of July, and all the rest of it. So kudos to everybody, and best wishes in the days ahead as you work towards hitting this out of the park and landing this one. Thank you.
Go ahead, Roxana.
Thank you kindly for your support and for the trustee support in general. We've always felt appreciated and always had the support of trustees for all the various initiatives that we are undertaking. And it's important to hear from you in terms of priorities. So I appreciate some of the areas you've mentioned, worried about transportation, worried about these positions, worried about how are we going to support the multi-year plan pillars when we have to, look at what we can support through surplus in terms of positions that are unfunded at this point. So certainly, if some of the areas are not coming to mind right now, we would love to hear from all of you so that we can put together some of the thoughts of the trustees and use them as input early on in the process as we're going through piecing together the budget and the funding. My crystal ball might be no more accurate than Wyatt and Willie's prediction of 25% rate of accuracy. But I am certainly hoping that some additional funding, timed investments will be made available to attenuate some of this funding shortfall.
Okay. And when seeing no other hands again, when this comes forward in the next steps, just in terms of the work that trustees do sometimes corresponding with the ministry and reaching out to provincial counterparts, I would be really interested to understand what the potential implications of some things like having to plan for 2 staffing models, for example, as well as the implications of some of the new PPMs and directives that are coming out, such as the one related to TVO, for example, and boards potentially having to pay for students to take external credits and what our forecasts are on that. And then we now have PPM 81, which we learned about at SEAC, and which trustee colleagues will hear about at the board meeting, if not earlier, but that will require our staff in schools to be taking on additional medical related roles. And, how are we going to make all of that work? So just understanding what those implications are so that we can, with the very few tools it feels like we have sometimes, at least do the best that we can for students through those other avenues to support the work that you're doing. Yeah. Go ahead there, Tanya.
Thanks, Tracy. Not sure if this is a question for today's presentation or some other meeting, but when we talk about the uncertainty as to whether or not we have to offer virtual school, if we were to consider offering virtual school as a permanent option, how does that impact the budget? And are there any pluses or gains in having that as a permanent option?
Thank you for that question. We have certainly considered that as well as a long-term option. Based on the current uptake of the elementary and secondary panel, we're looking at around $1 million in additional funding to maintain that system. And right now we have about 5% or less of our students in that mode of learning. So we do have to ensure that we have additional sections and courses selection so that they can have a meaningful experience and have the credits that they need to graduate. And if it's not on a bigger scale, that means that we lose that economy of scale in terms of staffing. So we have to add net new staff. So about $1 million is our net cost this year that we would be looking at, and it has been funded through the COVID PPF. The other consideration is where the provincial online learning and additional programming that is being considered is going to go. So will the ministry mandate that all that online learning, virtual learning be provincial? And that means that if provincially they offer that program, the student then doesn't belong, or the funding doesn't come to the school board, or if it does, it follows then with a transfer payment out to the student attending the virtual learning platform. And that too will result in funding reductions because we lose efficiency. So one student here and there that will not be taking the courses with us, we can't reduce the entire section because we still have students in that class, but we will receive the funding reduction. So it is a bit of a ongoing discussion and waiting to see where the provincial model goes. I am not sure whether or not my colleagues, the director or associate director, might want to comment a little bit more on the benefits side of your question. But in terms of the logistics and funding, that's the information we have right now.
Tracy, is it okay if I just jump in here?
Sure, go.
I just want to clarify, just in addition to Roxana's comments, one of the big challenges we have right now is whether we would even be funded for students who are in a virtual synchronous setting like we currently have. We had an exception over the last 2 years to do that, but typically our kids are on what's called a day school register, and they get funded a certain amount per student, or they can be on a continuing education register or an e-learning register. There is no virtual synchronous register right now, and so that's the big dilemma as well. In addition to, I think Roxana was talking about additional costs for virtual school because you might need additional administrators and other support pieces, but there's a fundamental question right now that the ministry is not telling us, and that's in addition to whether they want to centralize online learning and some of these other things. So I think we're still in a bit of a waiting game, and there's a distinct difference between online learning or e-learning and virtual learning, and it's the virtual learning that is the big question mark right now.
Okay, TBD on some of this stuff, which means, oh, David, if you're talking still, you're on mute.
I think there was a lag.
Oh, okay. That's interesting when that happens. Okay, so lots of stuff to be determined. As Jean said, all the best for these next steps. And the survey will be going out to collect feedback from the community, which will be great. Trustees, if you have any input, that should go to Roxana, if I heard correctly. And she's kindly offered to chat with people if that works better. And then in terms of the critical path, we'll be back here in a couple months' time, and hopefully with all of the funding in hand at that point to take away some of the uncertainty. So all the best with that, and have yourselves a great evening. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our budget workshop, and it's 8:05, so we've been at it for 2 hours. We have probably about another 1 hour to go. So if people want to take a 4-minute stretch break and meet back at 8:10, we'll see you then. So we just need to make sure we have quorum back here now. One more. Okay, there we go. Okay, we're off and running for the second half of our agenda, and now we're moving into trustee work largely. We'll go to 3.5, which is standing committee updates. And we didn't schedule a lot of time here. I don't believe we didn't have any far in advance reports submitted anyway, but we'll give everybody a quick opportunity. So 3.5.1, governance bylaw, standing committee. Are there any updates?
I can provide two brief updates. The subcommittee that is working, there is a subcommittee that's working on updating the board committees, both the policy and the governance procedure. So we've been meeting weekly. We'll continue to do so until we're ready to bring something to committee of the whole, hopefully next month. Crossing my fingers. And as far as the governance committee, Amy and I have been meeting regularly, reviewing, coming up with the plan for the year 2022. And we're also currently going through the bylaws. If there are any suggestions on improvements or things that we should look at, feel free to send your comments over to myself and Amy so we can incorporate those comments before we present something to committee. And that's it from the governance committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this group that's taken on a whole lot? Okay, so we'll move on with thanks to 3.5.2, the board self-assessment standing committee, and I can offer just a very brief update here, and other people on that group can certainly jump in as well. And we were to be delivering a 1-hour self-assessment session tonight, but I goofed up in terms of the scheduling, and Roxana had wanted to do the budget session tonight. So we kind of flipped those. And so you can look forward to that coming next month. And we have developed just a shell of an agenda at this point that is linked in the folder. And you'll see that we talked about the principles that we wanted to hold true to during this session. So we wanted to be very interactive, have some activity-based, as one of our PD people has said lately, tie it back to some criteria, and certainly we have those in the goals that we've developed. So we're going to be taking a look at those as well. So stay tuned. I think the group, we're meeting again next week, or in our off week, 2 weeks hence, to more fully flesh out our program for you. So as Tanya said, if there's any things that you want to see or don't want to see, just let us know. And that group involves Donna, Andrea, Margot, and myself. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the trustee PD. I think our busiest, well, one of the busiest standing committees of late, for sure. Go ahead.
Thanks. We just wrapped up our third of 3 PD sessions that were in a whirlwind of activity through January and the start of February. And I've been in touch with Rob Etoff to talk about what we can do in terms of some Indigenous learning Thank you, Tracy, for forwarding the link so that we could all sign up for Nancy Rowe's 4-part series. I've already signed up. I think Andrea and Tracy have already signed up. So it's not every week and it's not every other week. There's actually 2 that are each a week, 2 weeks apart. And then there's a 4-week break. And then there's 2 that are 2 weeks apart. So spaced out a little bit, gives time for thought and growth as we proceed through the series, and I'm looking forward to that. And I know that once we're finished that 4 weeks, Rob will be coming back to the Board of Trustees with some training for us and some PD for us on our role in bringing forward equity for students who are Indigenous, who are identify as Indigenous, as well as staff. So we're looking forward to that. We'll probably be sending out a survey maybe April-ish to see if there are any interests that we haven't been able to cover in the last couple of years that we can put into place before the end of our term. Thanks.
Are there any questions for the PD Standing Committee? Go ahead, Andrea.
I would just like to say that the 3 sessions that we had were excellent. I really enjoyed them. I thought they were very effective and they were efficient in getting some great information across. Some of it was a refresher, but much needed. And I just want to thank the committee for finding some really high quality facilitators for that.
Yes. I was wondering whether when we're done this series, whether you would consider or have planned doing some kind of assessment or evaluation just to see. Some of these are going to be annual things, I would imagine, or by motion, and it would be good to build on the good stuff, and maybe there's some tweaks that people see.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about doing a survey. I think that's a good idea to do exit surveys, exit passes, so that people can put forward their ideas. And you're quite right. We will be doing governance training annually, as was passed by board motion a couple of months ago. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thanks.
Thank you. Jean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Our speaker this week, Amy, spoke to the fact that she believed she had sent a book to each of us. And I'm wondering if anyone knows anything about that.
She forgot to send them. And so they are currently in the mail, and they're heading over to Susan Thrasher for distribution. Thanks for reminding me about that. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So seeing no other questions or comments on this one, we will move down to subcommittee updates. And the first one is 3.6.1, Reimagine Forward. And do you want me to start? I can start on that one. Okay, so Reimagine Forward, you will recall that we passed a motion a number of months ago that had a declaration in it from trustees, and that's how to reimagine forward education as we move out of the pandemic. How can we keep the good stuff that's been happening and build on it? And at that time, we forwarded it to the minister, and we asked him to set up some kind of provincial initiative to do the same. That is to harvest the great ideas and practices that are out there and continue to improve and evolve. Just given the profound disruption that the pandemic has had, now's the time. The ministry declined. Well, they didn't actually say anything. So we're assuming they declined. And so we built in a little fail-safe for ourselves, which was that if the ministry doesn't do anything, then we will. And so a group of trustees has been meeting over a number of months. We've been back to you a number of times. And what I think we're in a great spot. It's Leah, Margot, Joanna, Andrea, and I, and we've been meeting with David and Scott a couple of times most recently to land on a platform with which to engage the broader community. So this speaks to our training this week in a generative discussion, it was called. That is a big picture, future-oriented discussion about what education can look like, which falls squarely in our role. And so we met with a representative from Bang the Table, and this is a community engagement platform that is employed in, I believe, all of the local municipalities, save for Milton, but you can check it out. It's called Get Involved Burlington. There's one in Halton Hills. Oakville also uses it. So our communities would likely have encountered it. And they gave us really just a great proposal to utilize their tool for this discussion. You can do things like ideas boards where people can post their ideas and others can like it and build on it. There can be community discussion and all sorts of things. In the notes that I put into the file folder for you, you can see the proposal that's there, as well as all of the other Bang the Table resources that they've provided to us to date. So a couple of other points in terms of how does this work, operational versus governance, and this lands in largely in the scope of the trustee to take the lead on content and analysis, much like we did with our Halton Education Action initiatives. And staff have generously agreed to support in terms of getting the word out. So through communications, for example, if we move forward with Bang the Table, with the coordination through procurement that needs to take place. We developed a timeline. Again, should this move forward, we're seeking your blessing tonight and at the board table next week. We would be creating content over the next few weeks and launching for at least a couple of months of airtime. Wrapping up at the end of May-ish so that we could be in a position to know what the outcomes were by early June, so we can report back to the board and report through to the minister and ministry in terms of what we've heard. So we have kind of that general timeline that's been created as well. We had a couple of action items that came out of our meeting this week. I was to loop back with Bang the Table and get some additional clarification around things like where is the data housed, and it's housed in Canada, and who owns the data, and that's us as HDSB, we own the data. And if the platform is not renewed for another reason, that data is then destroyed on the Bang the Table end, and we would be able to retain it for future analytical purposes. Margot was to check in with Roxana to determine appropriateness of the funding source that we're suggesting, which is the trustee leadership account. The cost is $10,000, and it includes use of the platform as well as training for anybody who's interested, basically from staff and trustees. It also involves some consulting time from the service provider, as well as assistance on the back end with downloading and some analysis of the data. So it's a lot in a short couple of minutes here. Hopefully you feel like we've brought you along a journey and we're in a good spot. So I would just, before I let you know what the potential motion is, see if Margot or Andrea or Leah want to say anything as well.
I'd like to just say thank you, Tracy, for giving such a succinct overview, but also really thank you for continuing to provide leadership to our group on this. This has been a really, you know, I would say, here, I'm going to put my screen on now. This has been a really interesting journey. We've come there and back again. Like, I feel like we've written a Tolkien novel in this one, because really we really had lots of good discussions. We went away many times reaching out to our communities or our our contacts, and we came back to a place that really, I don't think this is where we began. So I just wanted to say thank you to you for keeping us going when there were moments of bleakness, because I think we've landed on I feel like this is something that is very valuable for our board, but it's something that I'm very proud that we can bring to this table.
Go ahead. I understand there may be some sharing issues. I'm going to go fix that. And Margot and Andrea, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just really want to quickly just loop it all back together. So even looking at, I'm just trying to think about when people are looking at why we are doing this, it comes back to our multi-year plan. It also looks back to the training that we've just had over the last couple of days. I think it's a really nice focus for our board to be coming back to, we struggle with that whole idea of bringing it back to the community. So I think it's a really nice piece to complement our training, to complement our multi-year plan, and to be a legacy piece for us in moving forward.
Yes, the training on Monday seems like the days are melding together. The training on Monday really cemented this purpose for me. And I'm actually really excited to move this project forward and really do that generative work to really grab ideas from our community and beyond, to really see where education, the potential for education. And I mean, we probably wouldn't be able to, of course, do everything, but it may spark some really fascinating movement forward, and also spark the ministry, hopefully, to also take an initiative like this and look at some of what we've come up with.
Thank you. And for people who were having trouble accessing the document, if you just refresh, I believe everybody should have access to it at this point in time. So I'm going to read the potential motion to everybody. And maybe I think what we heard also the other day was about possibly putting things on screen. If I put it in the chat box, does that have the same effect, or only if I share?
Do you want me to share it? I can share it really.
Yes, that would be good. This is like walking and chewing gum and itching my head or something all at the same time. Thank you. So that's the motion there at the end. Its purpose is to seek the funds to make this happen and to make it so we report back by the end of the school year. So here it is. Be it resolved that the Reimagine Forward Subcommittee be authorized to finalize plans to implement a community engagement initiative focused on generating ideas for a positive post-pandemic vision for education, utilizing the Bang the Table platform at a cost not to exceed $10,000 plus HST to be funded through the trustee leadership account, and that any amount in addition to the available balance in the leadership account be covered from prior term reserve account. Be it further resolved that the subcommittee will work with all trustees to implement this initiative and to report back to the board prior to the end of the 2021-2022 school year. And just above that, you'll see the direction that came from Roxana. That's what's in the blue here when Margot reached out to her, just with respect to potential funding sources. And go ahead, Amy.
Thanks. I'm glad that you have that above showing the funding sources, because there isn't a trustee leadership account. It's an HDSB leadership account. So your motion needs to change if you want it to come from there. But I was actually going to suggest that you might want to just ask for it from the prior term reserve, because we still have quite a substantial balance in there. And that probably is going to increase quite significantly at the end of our term, because we have not been able to participate in any really the kinds of conferences we would have gone to had we not had a pandemic for the last 2 years. So I do think that you could ask for it to be all from the prior term reserve, and I would certainly support that.
Thank you. I support making that change if that's what everybody wishes.
All good here.
I support that as well.
Go ahead, Donna. I don't know if you want to speak or if it's a yes, that's cool.
Yeah, that is cool for me. I would just request, thank you for giving us access to the document. If you could also give us access to the Bang the Table proposals so that I would have a better picture around it, because I'm not part of the committee and I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You bet. Go ahead, Amy.
I should have also said that this leaves more money in the leadership account for other things. So that's another angle to take on it, because I know that the board leadership account also covers PD for staff.
Okay, so I'm going to change this to trustee prior term reserve account, if that's okay. And then I would just, okay, so then we take the rest of this out, I believe. And then I know that committee of the whole doesn't have, like, we're not making this decision tonight. So, and just in with respect to what Donna was saying, that the sharing permissions weren't correct on the proposal, so people can take a look. I wonder if maybe we can go the route of, if there are any concerns, critical concerns with this that we would need to address through more conversation that you know of now, if we can hear them. Otherwise, can we assume that you're generally supportive of us bringing this forward then to the board? So I don't see any concerns. I know about the whole assuming thing, how that goes sometimes, but go ahead, Donna.
I'm tentatively in favor, but I really do need to see the proposal to actually know what I'm talking about.
Sounds good. Okay, so then is the next step to share out the proposal and to make this into a report for the board, into the board package. And then if anybody has any concerns, If you could just get in touch with one of us committee types, and we'll see if we can work it out in a timely way. So, because it would be exciting to move forward with everybody's blessing and involvement potentially. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for your time on that. And we'll go to 3.6.2, which is role of the trustee / onboarding. Over to that subcommittee.
Okay, so that is me. And well, I chaired. I provided a couple of or a report for the next two subcommittees. Sorry, I'm going around my tabs going, where is my tab? I think I closed the tab for my, there we go, onboarding. Okay. So I submitted a committee report for that discussed our trustee promotion onboarding committee meeting, which we had on the 24th of January. And so we're moving forward, gathering resources, potentially suggesting potentially putting a page on our HDSB website that will provide information about the role of the trustee, because we don't have that information. Basically, when you come to the HDSB.ca website and you go to the trustee area, it's just our contact information for the most part. So people really can't gather much looking at that to understand what the role is, and may not be comfortable potentially running for the role, or even understanding how to interact with trustees when they're in the role. So adding a page that explains the role and provides resources to further explain the role will help us, will help trustees better interact with the community at large, and also may inspire people to run in the future. Also, there is a presentation that Kelly has been working on that we may be able to use to go out to our community again in a proactive way, or perhaps the board could have an information night and use the presentation to again inform the community. We're still working out those sorts of details. And also with the recent training, the governance training, we may have some tweaks that we may want to, or things to consider for our next meeting. And our next meeting is on Valentine's Day. So that, I don't know if anybody else from the committee wants to. No, covered? Okay, good. Okay, so the other item, subcommittee, school naming and renaming. As you know, we were looking at changes for the procedure, and I'm going to present this. There we go. Let's make it a little bigger. Okay, so as mentioned, the governance procedure is unchanged up until part number 6. And so we're just dealing with information past that point. We are making the suggestions that are outlined in red. And so this, we reconvened the committee to handle some of the, well, we've put this governance procedure has been put into practice, and after using it, we decided we needed to tweak it a little bit. So we've we've put in that the chair will respond to people making requests to rename, and provided a potential letter as Appendix A. So you can see it's quite short, sweet. If they wanted to follow up with the chair, they could do so. And then adding a Part C to this, which is an annual report from the chair outlining all requests to rename a school will be submitted to the board at the last regular meeting of the board in October. And that date was chosen because of the cycle of the chair that's voting in the chair, and we wanted to kind of keep with the report should be done by the chair of that particular term, because they would have been privy to the request coming in. And again, we've provided an appendix, which is just down further in the report here. So you can see that it's outlined, submitted by the chair, of course, the date, gives a bit of the background, which includes the criteria, and then just provides the total number of school names with renaming requests that did not meet the established criteria, total number of school names with naming requests that meet the established criteria, and the status of any that had met the criteria would be listed underneath that. So we decided to keep it short and sweet, simple. Didn't want to make more work for the chair. The process outlines that the Board of Trustees will be informed in this process at points of when a request comes in, they'll be informed, etc. So this is kind of what we'd like to take forward. If people have any questions, go right ahead. Okay, so then since we are changing a governance procedure, perhaps it should go to legal first before heading for final. So General Manager Gortmaker, could that be done?
Most certainly. Would you like to take it to next week's board meeting with that provision, as we did with the student trustee policy?
Sounds perfect. Okay, we'll do that then, and hopefully I'll get you a motion to go along with that, and we'll have it in the package for next week. I'm glad that this is moving forward. Okay, I'll stop presenting. Oh, Tracy, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. My question is actually on the last one. I kind of missed the segue there. It's on the onboarding.
Oh, the onboarding. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll stop presenting this one. So the onboarding.
I heard recently in one of the professional development sessions that we were at, just a few thoughts about diversifying boards and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering, what has the group talked about, and I don't think you said this, but like hosting a session as well?
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant, that there's, the possibility of having this presentation that Kelly's making as a resource for trustees to be able to take to their community, or that the board itself could have information nights to be able to, attract interest from communities. Certainly we have diverse communities that if well marketed, could attract people to those information sessions, find out more about the trustee role.
And I was also wondering about, for lack of better words, I'll just call it an ambassador role. Maybe there's a trustee that's retiring, for example, from the role that, wouldn't be an awkward spot at all to field questions. A day in the life of, or, what is the real effort? How much time do I take away from my family or whatever else? I think I certainly didn't come as prepared as I could have been. It would be great to, in addition to a presentation, I guess, know who I could also turn to ask those questions.
Yeah,
Just
I think that's a great idea. I think that as we get closer to the municipal election, I don't know if people have made those kinds of decisions yet, but if someone feels that that would be a great role for them, certainly coming forward to the committee and letting us know, that could help us in some further planning.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for going backwards for me there. And so we have concluded our subcommittee items. Great work, everyone. And so now we have 3.7, which is a PD debrief. And we are a little bit shorter on time, but people have mentioned to me, some trustees, just about creating space to, if there's any reflections or anything that kind of reached out and grabbed you during the PD sessions, anything that people want to talk about. I've already been able to work in the whole generative discussion piece, so that was kind of cool. But maybe we can take the next 5-10 to see if there's any thoughts or questions or anything like that. Go ahead, Margot.
Yeah, mine's just a quick one. I just want to, I printed off, so Donna sent some stuff to everyone that's really great. It's her top, her top 10 list, and it's really great for me to have. I'm going to use it moving forward to help me. I think it's just great. So I appreciate Donna the help. So that, and again, I just thought my favorite was definitely Lori. I thought the way she connected with us was really nice. There was that connection piece that sometimes is lacking in training that we have, and I think that to me really hit home. So just wanted to give you my 2 cents.
Heather, go ahead.
Thank you. The PD was excellent, without question. And I think lots of us had learned a ton. And I'm just really hoping, since we spent all that time and taxpayers' dollars, let's call it a spade, that we actually implement some of the things that we learned and try to make our meetings efficient, effective, and shorten things up a bit. There's no reason why we can't try and implement some of the things that she said. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Andrea.
I already know that Tracy and Margot are looking at unanimous consent because I bugged them about it right afterwards.
You sure did. Go ahead, Heather.
Can we maybe try and not have everyone do the thank yous and maybe just let the chair do all the thank yous? That might cut things down. I know that we're all grateful, but maybe we could, let's try a few of these things and see if they work.
That's a good one. I think in conversation with Margot, and you will jump in here if I go astray.
You won't go astray.
I might.
You won't.
It's just I'm thinking about the hands up versus the Google Forms and all of that, and just how it's in all of these changes. Some of them seem super intuitive to me that we would rush in and do it, but then you get a whoa back from somebody, which is, well, that doesn't make sense to me at all, kind of thing. I would never do it that way. So it's just important to me, anyways, if I'm facilitating or chairing, that all of you want to do these things, or most of you, or everybody wants to at least give it a shot. Because that's how we've done a lot of things in this board is, well, I've got some concerns, but let's pilot this. Let's give it a try and see if it accomplishes what we think it's going to accomplish. So there's unanimous consent, for example. There's the thank yous thing for thank you, less thanking, for example. Amy and Tanya, what maybe you're adding something, or have cautionary tales, or what do you think? Over to you guys, you two.
I've been talking to Tanya about unanimous consent as well. I think it's a great add-on. We already have consent agenda. Unanimous consent isn't that far removed from that idea. And it definitely should shorten our board meetings. And I was right with you on that one, Heather, about letting the chair say the big thank you at the end. It's okay for people to say thank you. We are Canadian after all, but let's leave the big thank you to the chair, unless it's specifically in respect to a certain trustee's school, because I think otherwise, if everyone decided they wanted to spend their 3 minutes of talking saying thank you, we have had some very long board meetings. And so in terms of efficiency as well as decorum, I think it's really important to allow the chair to thank the presenter at the very end. And people can say their little thank yous as they ask their questions.
Tanya.
I'm definitely not going to say those two words right now, but I agree. So my question is, so with all these thoughts that we're hoping that we can implement, will there be, how will your proposal come to us as far as trying to implement some of those great ideas that were discussed?
Margot, or I can start and just say that these are kind of proposals from the floor, from us as a group coming forward. And again, let's hear from Kelly and see if there's any kind of cautionary tales. I would love, Tanya and Amy, or others who are well versed in the bylaws, everybody in general. But if there's any kind of woe backs that we need to consider from a, procedural piece, that people would bring those forward. If not, we can try things like we always have, switch the forms to the hands and see what works. Kelly, and then we'll go back to Amy. Sorry, I'm on mute telling you you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. I took my hand off and I didn't take the mic off. This board has done unanimous consent in the past, but you have to have a board who is willing to do it, because when people don't want to have a consent agenda, they will not. That's when it got changed. So items such as approval of the agenda and the minutes, those kind of things can be done through consent. There are other things that are very basic. They can also, like if there's just receiving a report or something that's a standard report, that can be done through unanimous consent. There are lots of things that can be done, but and I'm really happy this board wants to try it. I'm just letting you know it has been done, but depending on who's on the board, there are those who don't want to do consent.
You went back to mute for some reason.
Oh, well, I thought I'd finished and then I turned it off. Okay, so.
Okay.
I think it's a lag, Tracy.
Okay. David Bogue had that earlier. And I thought he was saying more. Anyways, the lag is right up here right now, Kelly. It's not you.
So the reason why I said that unanimous consent is somewhat related to consent agenda is because what we have mostly done is put those items that we would generally use as unanimous consent into a consent agenda. And so unanimous consent would not need to be used very often because we have a consent agenda. But I think where it could be used, we should use it. Or at least try it. There's nothing in our bylaws that would stop us from trying unanimous consent because it's within Robert's Rules of Order newly revised. So we don't have to put that in our bylaws because it's already a rule that we can use. So from a bylaws perspective, there's no change needed to do that.
Cool. Good stuff. Margot.
Yeah, and I'm just quick. So I just wanted to say the whole unanimous consent piece, I think, again, Kelly, and to your point, I think it's really important that we think about the impact it has. As you said, there's certain areas that unanimous consent doesn't always work. But I think things like approval of the agenda, approval of the past minutes, those types of things that are pretty run-of-the-mill things that maybe we can do. But again, I would be cautious, and I think again it's something that we need to softly I just sort of think of ensuring that everybody's on board. I would hate to do something that didn't gel with everyone, and we're not going to have again unanimous consent in the unanimous consent. So
okay, yeah, Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to something Margot said. The minutes are already part of the consent agenda, so we wouldn't need unanimous consent for the minutes. We would only need it for the agenda. So it wouldn't be used very much in our table because we already have the consent agenda. But I think it could definitely speed up those few little pieces where we don't.
Andrea.
There was also the part about the if it's a committee report, not needing like a seconder and things like that, because it's something that the board has requested. That was interesting. But I think maybe, I don't know if you want to take at some point a smaller group to kind of just go through our agenda and go, yeah, this might be a spot, whatever. I mean, when I was chair, I did away with the vote to adjourn because it's meaningless at the end. You want to be there forever, or you're going to just sit there. There's nothing to talk about. So, sometimes you just implement things that make sense. So.
Makes sense. And Art, Amy, and Tanya are looking at that agenda template.
Yes, that's why I put my hand up. We are currently looking at the bylaws, and the agenda format is in the bylaws. And we've already made notes about things like moving the student trustee report and things like that. There are some improvements that can definitely be made. So yeah, if anyone would like to look over the bylaws, and I think Tanya mentioned this earlier, just send us an email and say, you know what, I noticed X, Y, and Z. Is that something you're already looking at? And we're happy to entertain it because we're all about simplifying it.
Okay, so Margot, it sounds like Heather's hand just went up. That's what it sounds like. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I have lots of feedback on all of this. Are we looking in the bylaws about length of the question? I think we allow 3 minutes, reducing it down to 2 to avoid some of the speeches that we get before a question. Again, we could shorten things up that way if people were succinct and concise.
Go ahead, Amy.
That was a sticking point in our former board. We had a couple of trustees who would go on at length, and reducing it to 3 minutes was actually difficult. So I don't think we have people at our board that generally speak for more than a minute and a half. Sometimes we each do, but I think for the most part, we stick to under 2 minutes. But definitely, Tanya and I can take that back and look at it. And if you have any other suggestions, please do send us an email.
Thank you. So for now, it sounds like the information is flowing to Tanya and Amy with respect to some of those particulars for the bylaw, which is great. We have a couple things that we've talked about that concerns have not been raised about trying them. Unanimous consent is one of them, and maybe we start with the agenda just to get a feel for it, or start with a couple of different things, Margot, to get a feel for it. And yep, we can work on that, trying that maybe next week if that pleases the group. And then it's really, excellent. And this thing about the thank yous, that is, as I think Lori pointed out, a lot of these things like the meeting time are so not about the chair and vice chair. They're about us as a group and how we come to these meetings and so on. And the thank yous is one of them. You know, if it's your area too, I think Heather or somebody said, you know, maybe you got to do it, but otherwise maybe you don't. I don't know. So it sounds like at least those couple of things for now, and within the time frame of this discussion, are things that we could move ahead with. Margot, if that sounds okay to you. Yeah.
Yep, sounds awesome.
Okay. Excellent. And as Andrea has and others, you know, if you hear things in these sessions or otherwise, there are things that you want to try, let's bring them to the whole group and see if there's support to give them a whirl. Okay, excellent. Is there any other business? No other business. Public questions and comments. And we did have one. It was submitted at the last board meeting after we wrapped up the questions. And so in fairness to the person that asked, I don't think we should really tackle it tonight because they wouldn't know that it's being tackled tonight, kind of thing. Nothing has been submitted in the interim since the last board meeting or tonight. So nothing related to this agenda, let's say. And I can bring that question forward at the board meeting the next time around. It's just so you have a heads up. It's about case and contact management, which a number of trustees may have had public questions about as well. Is that okay approach for everyone? Yep, everyone who's on screen is nodding. So we'll move to then trustee questions and comments. Okay, I don't see any. So then, oh, did I do that? I inverted the order, my apologies. So we're down to item 6.0, which is adjourn. And since our agenda is exhausted, and so are we will adjourn the meeting. So thanks to one and all. Have yourselves a great night.